chairpersons, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege and my pleasure to present the new indicators for the assessment of quality in the management of STEMI. This is one, as you have seen, of the changes that have been done in the new guidelines. And the change is not only on the changes based on the new recommendations that you have seen, but it's more even conceptual. We have moved from the performance measures, which were mainly the recommendations for assessment of quality in 2012, to a wider view of quality. We're now recommending to assess quality from different perspectives, including structural measures, performance measures, patient-related outcomes, outcome measures, and opportunity-based composite QIs. Why is that? Well, quality the assessment quality is complicated. There's a number of dimensions. These are the 6 traditional dimensions that have been described for assessment of quality in healthcare. There's, of course, different points of view from the patient's perspective, community perspective, hospital, financial perspective. There's different. And there's different focus of the analysis. We have used this approach to assess structure, process, and results. And also you can use this assessment to address different type of problems, which can be technical competence and personal relations, but also underuse of appropriate services or overuse of unnecessary services. All these are very helpful for the evaluation of the quality of any healthcare procedure. The assessment of the structure evaluates the resources, which is human, material, financial. Process is the interaction between professionals and patients, and results assess health outcomes. Of course, with intention to quantify or at least address that there's adequate structural conditions, that there is adequacy with the standards, and thus an improvement in the outcomes, which is the final aim of quality. The new indicators are based in these quality indicators, this position paper developed by the Acute Cardiovascular Care Association, which have been updated with the new indication and some of the changes that have been developed during these 2 years. You will be able to find the exact definitions of these quality indicators with numerator, denominator, what is the background evidence for that. I will not get obviously into the details of that, but you can find it from the structural measures, for the performance measures, and also the composite quality indicator and the outcomes. You just have seen that the cornerstone on the management of acute myocardial infarction of STEMI is the early immediate reperfusion therapy. And to achieve an optimal management of the majority of patients, we need an organization that goes from the beginning, from the patient to the emergency assistance to the cath lab, because mostly it's primary PCI or the CCU. That can only be done through an organization. For that, it is essential, and this is the first quality indicator, is to have an organization. The structural measures is that the centers managing patients with STEMI have to be part of a network specifically developed for the rapid and efficient management of STEMI. That means that this network has to have a single emergency telephone number, pre-hospital interpretation of the ECG, pre-hospital activation of the cath lab, and of course defibrillators. These are evidence-based resources that reduce mortality in patients and structures managing patients with STEMI. The second issue, as the chairman mentioned at the beginning, this is about timeliness, so that key times to reperfusion are systematically recorded and periodically reviewed for assessment, and it is also essential. You've also seen this graph before. There's a number of things that let's say confer what is optimal management of patients with STEMI. For that, we have developed, we have selected the highest evidence-based performance measures. So for reperfusion, we have selected that the proportion of patients who receive any kind of reperfusion in the first 12 hours, those who receive, the proportion of patients receiving timely reperfusion with all the times that you just saw as recommended now by the STEMI guidelines. The recommendation or the proportion of patients who have left ventricular ejection fraction assessed before discharge, the proportion of patients without contraindications discharged on dual antiplatelet therapy, or those who are discharged on high-intensity statins, or patients with left ventricular ejection dysfunction or heart failure who are discharged on a beta blocker ACE inhibitor, or those who receive a smoking cessation advice or secondary prevention or refer for secondary prevention or cardiac rehabilitation, as you just heard in the previous presentations. What is important, these are not randomly chosen, and you can see for these two studies, on the left side, it's more than 100,000 patients recruited in the MINAP registry in the UK, how the variability of these indicators can be found in different and a large number of British hospitals. Also in the right side, you can see the variability of the composite quality indicator in a large number of French hospitals participating in the FAST MI registries in 2005 in red and 2010. So actually, these quality indicators have a variation which usually is not explained by the clinical characteristics of the patient. Moreover, and this comes again from the UK study, there's not a good correlation between these indicators, suggesting that there's not only one that have to measure. Unfortunately, there's institutions where one of these indicators is good, let's say, in the higher standards, but some others not. And you can see that there's positive correlation by some of these indicators, but even negative correlation with some others. That's why a wide view of the assessment of quality, it's important. What is essential also, and this comes also from the UK, is that the mortality of hospitals, and you can see the variation, even the outliers, is that for the given risk of these patients, actually there are hospitals with very high mortality with much lower mortality. So although clinical situation may explain part of it, definitely quality of care makes a difference. And I think that's essential why we decided to include, and we know that this is controversial, but it's still to some extent analyzing outcomes, in particularly 30-day adjusted mortality. It's something that gives a hint of that something may or may not be going well in that hospital, in that system. Also for 30-day adjusted readmission rate. Finally, we thought that from a practical point of view, it is important to have a composite quality indicators which may be easier to analyze, which is the proportion of patients with recommended therapies at the chart, which are very practical sometimes for analysis and evaluation and comparisons. And in fact, you can see both from the British study and from the French study that actually all of these indicators are actually associated with a higher or lower crude 30-day mortality, but also with adjusted 3-year survival in the French registry. In fact, it was observed that the hospitals with a lower quartile of quality indicators of composite endpoint actually had a much lower survival, and that the adherence to this composite endpoint was associated with a better long-term outcome. Finally, we wanted to move one step beyond, and for the first time we want to have a patient perspective of analysis. This is not evidence-based, but I think we need to start moving on the analysis of how the patients feel, what is the experience of the patients in the management of STEMI. Of course, all the previous thing, it is essential, but we treating patients, if we want to know whether we're doing the best for patients, not only for the heart, but also on their experience. So having a program to obtain feedback regarding the patient's experience is now a quality indicator, including how they perceive the information regarding angina control, explanations provided by doctors and nurses, and discharge information. This is, of course, something that will need to be moving on, but it still opens up the perspective of the assessment on quality. We definitely think, and on behalf again of my task force colleagues and all the task force members, that this will help assessing the quality of care in your institutions, in your system, but definitely mostly that it will help improving the quality of care of patients with STEMI. Thank you very much for your attention.